Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the last event under the series offered by the Big Data Analytics and Transboundary Water Collaboration for Southern Africa and the Sustainable Water Partnership on Transboundary Water Governance. My name is Dr. Clara Bocchino, and I would like to welcome you all. And I am very happy to introduce you in this last event, a very important panel discussion for the Southern African region. And I will be facilitating the session with my colleague, also a member of the collaboration from representing the Water Research Commission of Southern Africa, Mr. John Deeney. John, would you like to welcome?
Hello, everyone.
Thank you, John. So today we don't have presentation, it's just a roundtable discussion. And I would still like to remind you, though, that there are some rules just because of facilities in terms of connections. So please keep your microphones on mute unless you are speaking or you're called to speak. Still use the question tool provided because we're going to have a rapporteur today. His name is Imad Ibrahim, and he's a research associate of the University of Qatar at the College of Law. And his interest is specifically in transboundary water governance and the legal frameworks for data sharing. So he's joining us today as a researcher, but also as a person who's very much interested in following up what happens in our region. So he will take notes, but we would like to invite you to use the question tool in order for us to better capture what is happening. And also in any intervention that you would like to make, please raise your hand first, and then we will give you the chance to speak at the first available moment. So thank you very much for joining us. As I said, before we carry on with the introduction of our panelists, I would just like to give you a little bit of a context in terms of framing this discussion today, and also give you a little bit more of information of the Transboundary Water Collaboration for Southern Africa. So as I said, this session has been brought to you by the Sustainable Water Partnership, which is a global engagement of the USAID, and it's managed by Windrock International with Tetra Tech International, and IUCN Global Water is one of our partners, and that's why we work together to provide this series for the Transboundary Water Collaboration in Southern Africa. The Sustainable Water Partnership will close at the end of 2021, and the goals are on twofold. On the one hand is to support USAID's missions to integrate water security and approaches into their mission projects, and also to work on safeguarding access and water security in the projects that they are involved in. In Africa, they of course support the coordination for the collaboration that we are working with, the Big Data Analytics and Transboundary Water Collaboration for Southern Africa, but they also have a specific project on sustainable water for the Mara River Basin, which is closing this year, for which several activities were initiated specifically on transboundary water governance, including the creation of a water allocation plan on a transboundary level. So this is just for your information, the size and magnitude of the Mara River Basin. It's very similar to the size of basins that we're dealing with in the southern parts of Africa. The achievement today are, as I said, the water allocation plan, and then the design and rehabilitation of springs, both in Kenya and Tanzania, and other minor local activities geared towards promoting water security and also improved livelihoods at the local level. As far as the Big Data Analytics and Transboundary Water Collaboration for Southern Africa is concerned, the current phase is going to end in January 2021. And the focal area, geographic area of work is the Ramotwa Aquifer. The control area in terms of data verification is the Shira River. And the ecosystem that we're looking at is the Dolomitic Aquifer that corresponds to the Ramotwa Aquifer and parts of the Limpopo River Basin. We have sponsored over the past 2 years 4 projects, and the objectives of the 4 projects were very broad at the beginning, but we managed to narrow it down with experiences, and you'll learn a bit more about that experience also from our participants in the discussions today. But the idea is that we arrived at the creation of a prototype integrated database that is able to harmonize data collected from different sources within a country, but also to harmonize data collection at a transboundary level. So for instance, in this case, it was between the countries of Botswana and South Africa. We have used an ecosystem approach, so we created the first aquifer sustainability framework for a transboundary aquifer in Southern Africa, and we have developed modeling predictions for the dolomitic aquifer. And then we have experimented on coding for downscaling and localizing large data sets. So what in jargon is called hyperlocalization, which is basically trying to create a smarter contribution to data collection at the local level, not just by collecting at collection points on the ground, but also by looking at the input that can be derived by large data sets. And then we're looking at the new data. So the use of science, of citizen science, but also the use of models to merge qualitative and quantitative data sets, as well as the creation of artificial water quality data by transfer learning. So this is what we have achieved over the past 2 years, and the final reports will be available at the end of this year, as well as the prototype of the tool that can be used for understanding the data collection exercise and the merging of the data sets, and also the coding that is done in terms of supporting a visualization tool. So this is the work that we've done, and in the context of this work, we have decided that it would be a good idea to frame this into a transboundary water governance event, which was this training that was offered by SWP with IUCN. But we decided at the very end to have a round panel discussion that would involve the region in terms of the RBOs, so the River Basin Organization, and the national water agencies for South Africa, which has been a partner of ours for a very long time. So without much further ado, I would like to pass the word to my colleague, John Deeney, to introduce to you the panelists for today. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Clara, for getting us started. Again, good afternoon, everyone, or good day, wherever you are in the world. So I'd like to just tell you a little bit more about the panelists who will be leading the discussion today. We have among us Dr. Ebenitzario Chongwiza, who's a senior technical advisor to the Limpopo River Basin Commission, or LIMCOM for short. He's also an ex-executive secretary of the Okavango River Basin Water Commission. Welcome, Ebenitzario.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody.
I have on the list Tariro Saruchera, who is currently the acting director for the IUCN Water Program in the Eastern and Southern African region of the IUCN. Welcome, Tariro. I think you're muted.
Everyone, and it's nice to meet you again here. Looking forward to talking with you.
Great. We also have Mpolisi Mukawana, who's a scientific manager for information programs management in the Department of Water and Sanitation in South Africa.
Good morning, colleagues. Thanks for having me. Good afternoon, colleagues.
Also from the Department of Water and Sanitation in South Africa, Ramogale Sekwele, who is a scientific manager for coordination and liaison in the Planning and Information branch.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here for this discussion today. Thanks.
Great. And last but not least, Dr. Sibusisiwe Makanya, who is a senior researcher at IBM Research Africa.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and I look forward to what seems to be an exciting session.
Thank you, Sibusisiwe. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Clara to get us started with the regional perspective.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Yeah, the first topic that we would like to discuss today is actually pertaining to the region, the Southern African region. We have seen through the presentation of Tariro a couple of sessions ago that Southern Africa is one of the few regions in the world where through the very existence of the SADC community, which is a community of member states, we have developed a framework protocol for shared water courses, and then we have a series of framework documents and strategic documents that mandate not only the creation of river basin commissions, the integrated management, but also the activities around data sharing and data collection. So what I would like to discuss first with our panelists today, and I will really call on Tariro to give us a little bit of a reminder of the SADC protocol on shared water courses, is the protocol enough in their mandate to transboundary water governance to make sure that there is a sort of collaborative governance, that they are efficient in respecting their the expectations of the government and possibly even of the national agencies. So what are the pros and cons that come out of the protocol, and maybe what are the opportunities that one should look at going forward? Thank you, Tariro.
Thanks, Clara. This is a very important question, and I'm happy we have stakeholders from a lot of key institutions in the region to actually help me get through this. You see, the protocol on shared water courses must be understood for exactly what it is. It's a protocol which, in other ways, is a framework. The good thing is that it is legally binding. So all the parties that have ratified this protocol are legally bound to comply with these provisions. So when we ask the question, is the protocol enough? Okay, there are two ways of looking at it. And first, because it's just a framework, it means in principle, it provides a lot of guidelines. It provides a very solid basis for water cooperation. Now, when we then try to see, are we achieving what we set out to achieve by establishing the protocol, you are looking at a slightly different question because other factors come into play. But let's first look at how, or rather what makes the protocol very solid. As I said earlier, the first part and the most important part is that unlike other treaties, this one is legally binding to all parties that are signatory to it. The SADC revised protocol is founded on very strong platforms that include international water principles, that include IWRM principles that have already been promoted and taken root in the region. And to those who are listening to the previous 5 discussions on this webinar series, you remember all the international developments around the water law all the way from the Helsinki principles to date. So at that level, you will see that the protocol actually responds to all this, and it really brings the region together in terms of promoting regional integration and making it alive every time, because some of the provisions, like not causing significant harm to other riparians, the constant engagement that is required in terms of giving notices and so forth, it means that riparians always have an opportunity to discuss basin management plans. And I think what is also very interesting is that the protocol itself gave birth to other important guideline documents within the region, including the SADC water policy, the regional water strategy, and the 5-yearly regional strategic action plans that have a very strong focus on water resources management. So when you look at it from that angle, you realize that we have a strong protocol that tries to look at holistically the needs of the water sector. But you also see a few shortcomings that are arising because of a lot of other reasons. While the protocol is a legal document, you realize that there are actually no real punitive measures, or there are no sticks. This is one of the interesting and sometimes can be frustrating provisions with a lot of the SADC processes. There's always carrots, but they're never real sticks when you look at those who don't actually comply. So when you look at the guiding documents that were given birth to by the protocol, you realize that these are not exactly legally binding. They are just guiding documents, meaning there is room and flexibility for the parties to the protocol to get out of certain obligations technically. And while we talk about an integrative approach to water resources management under IWRM, you see that the protocol does not exactly talk to land and other resources, as the definition of IWRM addresses. And when you look at the actual text within the protocol, you'd realize that with the current challenges, maybe at the time of crafting, the protocol could have gone slightly further and explicitly mention other things or explicitly recommend certain things. For example, when you look at the lack of harmonization, whether of national policies, whether of metrics and so forth around the region, being a legally binding document, the protocol could have easily addressed this, and we could actually be having a lot more efficiency in the water cooperation processes at the moment. There is mention of data, which is data exchange. Actually, the protocol uses text information exchange. I'm sure I'll come to this at some point in the discussion. It is not stressed enough in terms of what should and should not be done around that. And also, at the time of the crafting of the protocol, I suppose groundwater was not as critical as it is now. We could actually have provided a lot more for groundwater by, giving certain explicit provisions that would actually be helping us now when you look at a lot of the overexploitation that is happening and lack of information and data around groundwater use. So when you just look at the protocol in that sense, I would say it's a good beginning, but it's not really perfect. In my view, it's not really perfect now. Of course, this is not a statement that is cast in stone, which is why I'm happy that we have key stakeholders around here. But this is my take of it at the moment. I don't know if you want me to go on and talk about other challenges in the region, Clara, or you want me to end here for now?
I think it's fine now for just framing the question and reminding people of the protocol in terms of what it sets the foundation for very strongly and what it could have done differently. But as we both know, times change, and normally we try to, regional documents are also have to be negotiated. And if we all remember the lesson on hydrodiplomacy from Diego Hiara a few weeks back, we all know how difficult it is, and for water specifically, because it's such a precious resource. So I think what you have given to us is more than enough. If there are any questions from the audience, please raise your hand or use the question tool as usual. If there is nothing, I would like to ask a very similar question, but more from experience of a person who spent the past 10 years working for the River Basin organizations, first in the Kavango River Basin Commission and now in the Limpopo River Basin Commission. So, Dr. Shangiza, in your mind, is the protocol sufficient to give full life and justice to the River Basin Organization in terms of setting them up with expectations, but also giving the mandate to fulfill those expectations? And so is it enough? And if not, where are the points in which as a commission you find yourself in need of more in terms of empowerment?
Thank you, Clara. Thank you also for the opportunity that have been provided to me to share also my view about these issues. I mean, just to say that in my view, the protocol is just a document. It sets up the framework for certain interventions to be made. More important is how we action what is captured, what is provided in the protocol. And then one of the things that I've been observed also within the member states' attitudes towards those regional protocols, international conventions, and so forth is, first of all, the issues that are captured in a protocol or a convention are cross-sectoral. Although the entry point is water, for instance, but other sectors also have a role to play, right? If you look at the SADC protocol on water courses, I mean, the water resources management institutions are not really the pressure force over the resources. The pressure over the resources come into other sectors. But you will find that the major driving force in terms of the implementation of the protocol is just the sector water, which down the line, it creates some difficulties in terms of implementing the protocol. To cut my story short is that we lack, as member states, the capacity to domesticate what we agree regionally or internationally. It becomes an issue of those who went there to sign the protocol, and to some extent it becomes confined to that particular sector, be it water, be it environment. While, as I mentioned before, we need to find ways of really providing all the critical players into the implementation of the protocol. And then again, to make sure that we have some national bylaws, right, that facilitates the implementation of the protocol and international conventions. And then again, to understand that for the case of the Southern African region, the RBOs are commissions. It's slightly different from the case of West Africa, where we talk about river basin authorities with a much greater mandate to really drive the development process within the basin. And then, of course, bringing all the critical sectors within that particular geographical context into play. So in the Southern Africa, we're just a commission with a mandate to advise. We're not implementers. So whatever the RBOs are supposed to do, it has to be provided by the member states themselves, and then for them to act in an advisory role. And then, of course, there is a mechanism for them also to generate visible impacts to justify the existence of the RBOs. And then, of course, by generating visible products that convince the member states on the usefulness of the RBOs in terms of benefits, right? You will have that level of more engagement by the member states into empowering the RBOs for them to really conduct their business as described in the sort of mandatory document. I will stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shingiza. That was very interesting. I think it brought out something that often happens, which is the tension between what a member state wants to achieve, and then how does that translate at the regional level, and then it goes back into a regional agency where there has to be this kind of triangulation, but it's always a little bit difficult. And I also take the point that it is often the case that when we talk about water, the issues that come about from water management are not really issues that come about with the water sector itself. They come from all the other economic sectors. They come from land uses. They come from home and human development and economic development. But then it's the water sector that is tasked to sort everything out and to kind of use a bit of acumen into how to bring things together. I don't know. I mean, you mentioned the national level and the role of the member states, and I wonder, since we have the DWS in the room, if maybe somebody would like to comment on involvement that the DWS has had in regional projects like the development of Hydra or of other specific initiatives that really were geared towards at least providing the data or the capacity for the member states to collect that data in a harmonized manner in order to facilitate data sharing and cross exchange of data. I don't know if somebody from the DWS would like to pick up on that, maybe Mr. Muzariri.
Okay, afternoon, Chair. Afternoon, everyone. Yes. I was muted.
Sorry.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for giving me the platform to share my experience on data sharing. But as most of the members have already said, the concept of data sharing. Okay, each and every member state is long ago used to have its own ways of, let's say, data collection, data processing, data archiving, and generation of information and analytical products. But then I think sometime early in the 90s, I still remember it was 1992, there was a project initiated by SADC called the FRIEND Project, 1992. Where the issue was like, can we have one central repository where we can have logical data? But basically, it was like the FRIEND was more on the flow regime, so it was more on the river flows. So I still remember in 1992, quite a number of participants from different countries within SADC, they met in Tanzania at the University of Dar es Salaam for over a month to populate the FRIEND database. And then that's when the FRIEND database started. But then it was like an initiative which was done to have one central repository of river flow data. And then after that, then okay, maybe, but then people need to share data. But I think that's when now when issues of, let's say, floods are happening, and how do we as the different countries react to a flood? Because maybe that most of the, let's say, like in what would happen, like there may be floods in a country, and there may be heavy rains in another country, but then we'll have floods, let's say, in the downstream country. So I think there was this need to say, how do we come out with mechanisms for the parent countries to share data and information? And then this gave birth to the SADC ICOS project. Then the main principle of SADC ICOS project was to create a platform where member states can share data and information. So the first thing which came about was like, which I found that after a review of the preparedness of the member states, was that member states didn't have a common data set. So which means sharing of the data was a problem. So I think this project was initiated with instead of phase one, I think it was in 1998. Then by then, all member states were afforded the opportunity to have one database, which was high data by then, which was replaced with Hydra during the second phase. And then when it comes to sharing of the data, by then for phase one, which was 1998, I think, to 2003, and phase two, which was the 2006, 2010, they chose the Department of Water and Sanitation in South Africa as the implementing agent. And then now, so for the collection, and then they chose specific stations where they need to be populated. And then now for the transmission of the data from the stations to the regional center, which was South Africa, then they entered into a collaboration with through WMO's efforts with HUMETSAT. So all the transmission was being done through the HUMETSAT satellite. So all the data from the stations will go via HUMETSAT to South Africa. Then the member states will access the data using internet facility. But most of this data was more on a real time. Both member states really needed real-time data for management of hydrological extremes. And then for historical data, the Department of Water Research was now given also the mandate to populate and update the historical data, but under that one which came from the FRIEND project. So this initiative was there, I think, until the SADC High Coast project ended in 2010. And then I know, like now, there have been efforts to, well, I think now SADC is now what we call the SADC Climate Center. So now they want to move, let's say, to make the SADC Climate Center be responsible for having the central repository of all the climatic data and other ancillary data at that center, and then also coordinate the efforts of data sharing and the data management. But I think the most crucial element, which was also discussed by other panelists, is that we find that on all of these efforts, the responsibility lies basically with the member states. But the member states are the ones who are responsible for the data collection, processing, and archiving. So, but I think in the end, you may find that, like, even when there are problems with data sharing, if a member state will say, no, we don't want to share our data or something like that, there are no, like, sort of binding. There's no binding framework to make the member states comply. But I still remember now when the region moved from the use of the humidity satellite to the GSM, member states, they will say now they are taking total ownership of their data, and then they can send to SADC Climate Center what they feel like sending. So from what the other speakers were saying, I think there is a need of a proper binding framework on how we can do the data sharing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this historical information. I think it's very important to understand also that what happens at SADC is not just around creating protocols and strategies, but it's also about supporting regional integrated projects that then create a sort of momentum for specific issues. And in this case, it was the harmonized data collection throughout the region for data flows and data quality. I have a comment in the box from Lenka Tame. Lenka, you are welcome to unmute yourself and maybe introduce yourself before you raise your comments for the discussion, which is taking us a little bit back to the governance question and the role of the RBOs. Lenka, I'm going to unmute you, and then please just introduce yourself so we know where you're from. Thank you.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I was just adding to what the two panelists have said in terms of elaboration of the specific issues or specific solutions, including tools for for river basin organizations. I'm Lenka Tamai, and I know the panelists. I'm with the Orange and River Commission. Just to say that actually maybe the protocol left out the detail deliberately. As we all know, issues of cooperation between sovereign states is almost a voluntary undertaking, in which countries loosen, as you may want, their sovereign limitations and prefer, through forms of agreement of different nature, to cooperate in certain specific areas. So I believe the fact that it's either alluded to or maybe left out could have been deliberate to give space for river basin organizations to establish themselves, or countries to form their own frameworks of agreement, and in that way identify what are the specific gaps and what are the specific priorities that they feel they can jointly handle, adding to their own individual efforts, and also to jointly agree on what are the priorities that have to be handled in order to action the cooperation within the specific river basin. And I think Dr. Shongwisa touched on this. I just wanted to re-emphasize that I fully agree with that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tame. Thank you. We actually add on to what Dr. Shongwisa was elaborating in respect of explaining a bit more about the diplomacy around the creation of river basin organization and the joint management of such an important natural resource as water. So thank you very much for your contribution. It's very well taken. If there are no more points around the governance, I will really ask to go back to the data from the contribution of that we just heard from DWS and call back on Dr. Shongwisa to just give us a bit of a hint about the positioning of RBOs around data collection and data visualization, and how do they cooperate with the member states. I mean, we just heard very clearly that the member state is ultimately responsible for data collection, for hosting, and for archiving. But at the regional level, so when you have a transboundary aquifer, that also poses a role, or should pose a role, for the RBO. So how does the RBO get involved, if at all, in matters of data collection and hosting or visualization? Thank you, Eben.
Thank you, Clara. I mean, just to say, we are all aware, right, that this issue of transboundary conversation, it's something new to most of, recently new, so to speak, but it's not really yet a proper modus operandum of national institutions to think laterally. We think within the nations very vertically, in silos, even in terms of cross sectors within a country. There is some kind of difficulty in really looking laterally also in terms of processes. So to say that at the transboundary scale, it becomes even more complicated. Because when we are doing our own day-to-day work, I mean, very seldom I think, well, what is happening across borders? So probably the advantage of the RBOs is to push for that kind of horizontal thinking in terms of how we plan the management of the resources, especially those that are cross boundaries, like river basin systems. So I think that the RBOs have a great role to push that agenda from the member states to think across boundaries. Now, it is, since the RBOs are not the actual implementers, probably the key role of the RBOs is to set up appropriate fast platforms that can facilitate this kind of transboundary communication, but probably to trigger interest is to bank in quick wins where we can demonstrate the benefits of data sharing, for instance, because we should not share data for the sake of sharing. This data that we are sharing should be put into use, right? And then it should be managed strategically, that we have visible results, that it is helping planning, it is helping management, it is helping also inform decision making, generating positive spin-off for each of the contributing member states, because member states also, they don't invest in terms of generating data, sharing data, investing for time of the experts to be communicating with the other member states without seeing the positive side of it, right? So that aspect of setting up appropriate platforms and systems that can optimize the use of the data more than just storing the data, but to see that it cascades down into actual management, right? Not not to be archiving just, but the data is put into use to address country-specific needs. I will give you an example from my experience with Yotacom. For instance, Namibia did have a vested interest to get information in terms of flow regimes from Angola, but of course, due to the circumstances, Angola, the gouging stations, you see, damaged with difficult access. But to make things even more complicated, Namibia wanted data from a particular point within Angola where they needed the information in terms of flow regimes. And then those stations were not there. But because they recognized the importance of having data from that particular point, Namibia was willing even to invest in the building of that station, right? Paying for it, right? And then facilitating the whole process of capacity building within Angola for capturing this information and facilitating the sharing. So just to emphasize that issue, if we see the benefits of getting data sharing, countries are really willing to invest. A similar process is happening now within LIMCOM, where I'm associated with, in terms of flood forecast. The Limpopo Basin is a well-known basin in terms of high variability of climatical processes, floods and droughts. So there is a common understanding of the importance of data sharing to facilitate or more precise flood forecasting modeling procedures. So the member states, through that recognition of the importance of exchange data for flood forecasting at a higher precision with a much bigger time lag in terms of the predictions, they are now willing to invest, right, in terms of setting up a transboundary flood forecasting center, right, that even if it's localized within one specific country, the actual players, the actual managers of this center will be provided from all the countries, right, in terms of expertise to be there. And not only that, to create a system that this transboundary flood forecasting center is also connected to existing national flood forecasting centers within the departments of water affairs, right? So there is a vested interest by all the 4 member states because they perceive the actual benefit in terms of investing in that process. And then, of course, it is being done also with the assistance of our international cooperating partners. And then, of course, we need to facilitate all the issues associated with principles of data sharing, agreed the parameters, frequencies of sampling processes, analytical process to be standardized, right, to facilitate sort of a common visualization of the data that is flowing across countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the examples as well, which are very important, and I think they also answer one of the questions that came from one of our audience, that of Patience Mukuyu, who asked if there is a real need for data in Sharon, you know, apart from hydrological extremes, which your contribution actually demonstrated there is a real need for data sharing, and we don't want to get to the extremes. We want to get to the normal data sharing to prevent the extremes from happening. So with that concluding remark, I would like to pass on to John to take us through the experience of DWS's member states on data and their relation with the region and the cross-border data collection. Thank you, John. The floor is yours. John is offline. I think he might have had a problem with the connection. As we know, those things can happen. So let me then go through with the work of DWS, and we have touched upon the questions of region and data sharing, but we know as we know now that the role of the member state is very important, and how the member state understands, appreciates, and takes in the mandate that is also provided by the regional framework is very important. So I would like to ask Mr. Mohale from DWS, how easy has it been for DWS over the past 5 years to share data into a regional platform or to receive data from the region? So what is your experience at DWS based on what we have heard so far, and also the contribution around the history of database creation. Thank you, Mr. Mohale.
Thanks, Clara, and thanks for bringing me into the discussion around the easiness of the national participation in data sharing and exchange to date, say in the last couple of years. As a member state, we in South Africa, they have been very happy with the developments to date with regard to the data. There has been challenges, obviously, but then the issues, and I think we've raised quite reasonable challenges and benefits thus far. But the contribution of South Africa into regional organizations on data has been very fruitful in the sense that it helps in our planning and execution as well of our use of our water resources. And we have in the past few projects that we've been involved in where also data harmonization or standardization and or sharing has been the center of the development or otherwise research and development projects that we're doing. Found it very interesting in the sense that this has helped a lot as well in the expert network development within the region. The issue of being able to discuss with the technical expertise from the other countries and on a common resource, which for us facilitate an element of potential conflicts to cooperation potential as a subscription of us to the UN or UNESCO on that program. It has helped a lot in the sense that we have been able to also develop certain capacities jointly, where now the approach of data collection, harmonization, and sharing has been communal. One of the examples that one could give is on the Stamford Aquifer system, which we are currently on phase 3 of the project. But in the first 2 phases, especially even more in the first phase, where we have realized the differences in frequencies, in data collection frequencies, the approaches that are being followed between different countries, the 3 countries that are involved in there, has helped us quite greatly to even find the mechanism within Orasacom. And I like what Linka is saying, that SADC protocol has probably deliberately omitted the nitty-gritties of how to go about, because that can be left to where now the formal law structures could actually deal with issues like this. And in this case of the Stamford, we have found or developed what we call multi-country consultation mechanism, which now deals with all issues relating to the data needs, data collection, data harmonization, synthesis, and all that. And over and above the data housing within Orasacom, which now allows parties to be able to access the same data, which they can then apply within their respective countries for their sovereign rights, and or where needed now jointly look at the same data, which is not different from one country to the other, as the case could be in the case where such a protocol and or river basin commissions have been formulated to address such issues. So in a nutshell, the provisions made at the national and at the region and also at the UN level of data sharing on transboundary resources, water resources, and or not even only on transboundary water resources, but also on areas where now the impacts could be actually felt of in other countries by activities happening in another country, has made things much more. I think it's promoting and it's going in a good direction of the issue of promoting cooperation amongst members. Just a few challenges that here and there one would experience or we have experienced during the STARS project, which probably are communal, which we have learned also in other case studies when we did study visits to the other countries. the issues of legislative differences as well. It posed quite a bit of a challenge, where now the application becomes different of the same resource by different countries, and these are the kind of issues that needs to be looked into as well when we find a central point for member states that are sharing resources at transboundary level. There are things which also came up as both beneficial and or otherwise challenges, posing challenges that have came up during the projects that we have had. Issues such as benefit sharing, and I think I've just posed a question. I'm not sure if I'm technically inclined here on the chat box, where now I was asking Dariro if the view around the issues of benefit sharing or the use it or lose it principle by the SADC protocol, where now in the event that you've got a resource that you are currently not using, but there's potential for future use, you potentially, or according to my understanding of the SADC protocol, I could be corrected if I'm wrong, is that one could not immediately start reserving for future when someone needs today. And I wanted to sort of, if we could at some point also drill a little bit into the fundamentals. I may not be in the picture as I'm an applicant, but not necessarily have been involved in the development of the protocol, of the founding principles thereof, of future planning scenarios. Why I'm saying this is that each country has got its own national plans, and there's future predicted, and there's future needs and so forth. Should we not be then finding a mechanism in which then this kind of plans are also coming into party when we think of water resource use, which are communal, that's transboundary water resources, to ensure or to allow for such the reservation of future use where needed. But I think I'll leave it to colleagues to also enlighten me in that regard, and if that's the case, of the use it now or lose it for future if there's no, if there's someone who wants to use now. And maybe I should not go much more into details as we continue. I think Sakile would help with regard to the Ramoto specifically in terms of the challenges that we are experiencing there, and one thing that I would also like to highlight, which again is a benefit and also at the same time becomes a challenge for us, it's this project-based funding approach, where we become we get an injection to do certain work, which helps a lot. But unfortunately, there's no proper mechanisms laid out between states to take things forward beyond the project funding. And I think if there's a way in which we could also strengthen the capacities of states to make sure that what is learned through projects which are funded by organizations which comes and go, does not lose momentum when funding falls. And these are the kind of things that probably states might need to make provisions to make sure that these kind of issues don't fall off when funding falls off. And I think I'll leave it at that for now, Clara.
Thank you very much. John is back. Yay.
Apology, colleagues. My computer's not being kind to me today, so I haven't managed to keep track of all the discussions. But I would like to pick up with Mxolisi, because we heard earlier from Musariri, that the member states are very much kind of engines of generating much of the data that gets used in a national and a transboundary context. So to kind of pull that through a bit more and pick up on some of what Ramokhale was saying, Mxolisi, the question I'd like to ask you is, from the national perspective, the kind of capacities and mechanisms that are in place to compile data, bring it together, make sense of it at a national level, and then also, thinking through to that transboundary dimension as well. From a member state perspective, do you want to touch on some of what's happening within the DWS, the national context at the moment?
Thank you very much, John, and thanks to Clara and everyone for this opportunity to represent the DWS. I've been listening very carefully about all the gaps and the issues that have been presented in this platform relating to the unavailability of credible data, inaccessibility of data in a secure and timely manner, be it to fulfill local obligations or regional and international obligations, all the way to up to the SDGs level. The department, the management from the DWS has been aware of all these gaps, and as a result, there was an initiative to relook at the current policies, such as the National Water Resource Strategy second edition. In 2014, when it was reviewed, specifically related to this issue that we're discussing, is Chapter 13, under monitoring and information, where a gap was realized that all these gaps are as a result of a lack of a model for data acquisition and management in South Africa. So that model would have to ensure that all institutions, department, entities, private institutions are catered for, and they collaborate in ensuring that this model is adhered to when we perform data acquisition and management for the water sector. So that led to the department initiating a project on the development and implementation of a data management strategy for water and sanitation in South Africa. And the main objectives is that when you look at the value chain for data acquisition and management, there were 4 pillars that stick out and that affect data availability, accessibility, security, and timeliness in a negative way if not done properly. These pillars are data governance, who should do what, when, and how, in roles and responsibilities. The second one is data lifecycle management, otherwise known as standard operating procedures or best practice. The third one is data management systems. What data is stored and archived where, and how should it be disseminated? And then the fourth pillar, which is also very critical to this, is stakeholder collaborations and partnership. So as a result, the objectives of this data management strategy became to develop a framework or strategic guideline to enhance these 4 pillars. And then the framework was thus developed after that and presented back to the management, and then it was approved, and now it's going to appear in a chapter in the upcoming National Water Resource Strategy 3rd edition. Look out for maybe Chapter 14 if the latest draft remain as is. So now, with regard to why we are here, the framework also aims to address data groups or data requirements that are related to our commitment to fulfill international obligations, the SDGs, and our transboundary obligations. So what we want to do there is that we will perform what we refer to as a situational analysis, where we identify the gaps. They're already identified, well presented in this platform and many other platforms, make recommendations for filling these gaps, and also coming up with an implementation plan that will ensure that the data that we need to fulfill our international obligations is available, accessible in a timely and secure manner. So that is the one of the initiatives that have taken place since 2014, and it's under we are in a stage where we want to implement it. The other one is the digitization of water and sanitation monitoring systems. What we aim to do here, because for us to have data that is readily available, timely for anyone to access it, be it from local or from other countries, the databases must not be static. They must be dynamic. Because if you look at issues related to climate change, we have more disasters taking place, such as flood, drought disasters are taking place more frequently than before. Hence, we need to be able to generate data and information at a near real-time situation. So hence, we need data sources that are dynamic, which are not static. Hence, the interest in this big data analytics project, where we have identified that machine learning teaching systems on how to study our data can help us to have early warning information, can help us to minimize the need for human intervention when validating data, and so on and so forth. And then even when we're dealing with source systems that produce data in different format, it becomes easy when we can be able to digitize. And lastly, we want to be able to look at other techniques, not to replace the current conventional monitoring approaches, but to supplement and support it. Techniques such as remote sensing, for example, which can supplement and help us to acquire data when the current monitoring systems are down, or even fill in missing data when we are not able to collect data as we should. So that is the main initiatives that have been started by the department, and the whole aim is to ensure that data is credible data is available, is accessible in a timely and secure manner. So that is the initiatives that the department has been involved in. And maybe let me hear if colleagues have anything to say over and above that. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Mxolisi. Thank you for that input. And I think it's good to hear that in the design of these policy and implementation frameworks, the international dimension has actually been factored in quite explicitly. And I think maybe of relevance at this point, and it's a question I'd like to pose to both you and Ramokgale, perhaps from a national perspective. It's a question that's been raised by Patience Mukuyu. Patience, I wonder if you'd like to unmute yourself and pose your question around seeming reluctance in the past to feed into to shared platforms, to feed data in on the part of individual member states. If it's so important, why are we seeing this general reluctance? I think it'd be useful to hear from the national point of view, and then also from the transboundary point of view. Patience, are you with us?
Yes, John, thanks. I think you've put it correctly there, because I was just picking up on the previous speaker who was saying that there was a reluctance by member states to feed into these shared platforms, this data. And so my question was more about the need for day-to-day river basin management. Do countries not need data from other riparians to be able to carry out general river basin management not related to urgent tasks like hydrological extremes or floods and stuff like that? What about other things like future planning? Is there no demand for such data, which would maybe incentivize them to share their data so that they also receive something from other riparians? Yeah, I think that was my question. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Patience. Mxolisi Ramokhale, is there anything that you'd like to respond on that?
Thanks, John. Thanks, Patience. Maybe before I go even far, I would like to bring Musariri rather to this. I think he will respond quite eloquently to that. But then from the South African perspective, I would like to put it forth to indicate that we have always been making our data available, and I therefore cannot say respond to the question of the reluctance thereof. The data that is classified from ourselves, we put it online and it's available, or otherwise on request, and it should be able to be provided. Specifically on Hatstra, I would like to bring Musariri in here to sort of elaborate on if there are any restrictions or of that nature to the data sharing from the DWS. Musariri.
Thank you, Ramokhale. Thank you, John. I think like what Ramokhale is said, with us, whether it's groundwater, surface water data, all our data is freely available from our website. You can download data anywhere else for any use at no cost. But I think I think the main thing which needs to be looked at, even that whether it's for demo operation, whether it's for modeling or whatever, our data alone is not enough. Let's say you are doing a dashboard modeling, you also need rainfall data. You also, like what the first speaker was saying, all these things, it's not, because for you to run a model, you need maybe land use data, rainfall data, and all this type of data. So like for us to come out with better hydrological or water resource product, is all relevant data freely available. I think that one will be I think the catch point. But for our surface and groundwater data is freely available. And then with other countries, I'm not so sure. I wouldn't like to speak much about other countries, but I would like to sort of reiterate that there is a commitment among member states to share data, is what happened during the SADC High Coast project. But the issue which was sort of happening around that time was they were willing to share amongst themselves. But then they were saying, but the main issue was most of these member states, some of them, through the water sector reforms, that are a bit commercial. So they want to recoup the cost. So they'll give you the data if you want, but you have to pay some cost towards the data. So yes, the data is there, but you can only have it at a cost. Unlike South Africa, where the data is freely available at no cost. Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues, for those responses. And I think for the sake of time, we do need to move on. But perhaps Ibn Itzario and Tariro, if you'd like to respond at all to Patience's question from a regional perspective, I think if you could do that in your closing comments, that would be great. I would like, before handing back to Clara, just to take two quick questions. We've got hands up from Jethro and from Kevin. Jethro, do you want to go first? And if you could just say who you are and where you're from before you raise your question.
Okay, my name is Jethro Zwarima. I'm at Investor Vendor. Yeah, it's quite interesting that at a regional or the basin regional level, we have more than close accurate data, but I'm not so sure. Maybe the Department of Water and Sanitation guys may inform me. How much quality data do we have from the user point? For instance, irrigation and other commercial uses. Why am I asking this? It's because we know that kind of data fits very well in the modeling as well as in the for the purpose of planning. Otherwise, we may talk a lot of small-scale irrigations. For instance, I'm from the Vembe district. A lot of these small-scale irrigation schemes are coming up but the collection of data, the amount of data they're using, it's not known. So to what extent is the department looking into that, so that we also have data from the user point of view? Thank you.
Thank you, Jethro. Could we take Kevin's question and then we'll ask the DWS colleagues to respond to both?
Hello?
Yes, Kevin, go ahead.
Yes, sorry, John. My name is Kevin Peterson. I'm associated with the University of the Western Cape, but I also work as a consultant throughout the region, specifically on groundwater issue. And I think it's fair to say that data is poor across the region and very difficult to obtain. And I think an important point that I have to make is that although there are new techniques like machine learning and so forth, the whole issue comes in that there's no data sets to validate these models against. So your correlations becomes poor, and your models is just but a model. And this is something that is really a concern, that we've got no long-term data series that we can validate against. And I'm afraid that there's a perception that this new techniques can solve problems, that will assist us, that will help us to optimize, but we cannot move away at this stage in the region from setting up proper monitoring systems with the requisite frequency of data collection. That is a number of years away. We just don't have the data sets, even in South Africa, to validate against. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Kevin. DWS colleagues, do you want to respond to those two questions that have been posed? I'll leave it up to you who'd like to respond to which ones.
If I may respond, and then maybe the other colleagues can support or correct me. I think the Dr. Kevin is correct by highlighting the issues that we are facing. It is common knowledge that our monitoring networks are decreasing, and they have been decreasing over time. And also our data collection frequency has also been decreasing. So as a result, data availability also is becoming low and low over time. So that we can give a number of reasons to that, budgets and so on and so forth, but those are the issues that needs to be addressed at the sector-wide, and then and also internally in the DWS. So I will also hand over to Mr. Musariri to talk about this, because we also have a project internally there on the optimization of national monitoring networks. Maybe he can come in and maybe give some input regarding why the data is deteriorating over time.
Thank you, Mxolisi. Musariri?
Thank you, Chair. And, thank you, Chris, for putting me on the spot. Okay. And Dr. Peterson for also putting me on the spot. I think I do concur with both of them. Was that in 2014, the department realized that the state of our monitoring programs is not up to date in terms of spatial coverage, in terms of reliability, the type of data being collected, and the frequency of the data being collected, and the variables being collected, especially with the issues of water quality coming onto board, the issues of admin drainage coming onto board, the issue of transboundary. So we initiated a project called the Review, Evaluation and Optimization of the Water Resource Monitoring Programs, which are 10 national. And Kevin Peterson was the key person for the groundwater. So what he contributed is the truth, because he is the one who did the research and gave us those inputs. So as the department, as of now, through that project, they came out with a strategy on how to optimize the 10 national water resources monitoring programs. So now we are in the phase of developing an implementation plan. But the strategy was quite a huge thing with a very huge budget of approximately, if I'm not mistaken, 10 to 15 billion rands. So it needs a lot of juggling around to see how best we can implement that strategy. We really know, and then we really take note. And what Kevin said is the actual truth, which is in the country, and also I think it's also reflective of what is in the region. And then there is this other issue which was discussed upon, the issue of the water use. I think as a department, we do have a section which is responsible for licensing water use. And we do have a database called WEMS, where all the water use licenses and the compliance and all those aspects are being dealt with. But then I'm not so sure, like, because we are talking of irrigations and things like that. Because normally, I think with our Water Act, there is a divide, like one, the water for primary, or what we say for domestic use, which is not licensed. And then there is one for commercial use, which is water license. So it's always difficult to say how to quantify that one which we use for domestic purposes. But for most of the commercial, although it's a new initiative which we try to have everyone on board, so there may be gaps, because we are trying to make sure that everyone is registered, but that database is there in the department. Thank you, John, and the other guys.
Thank you for those. I'm a little bit tight on time. I don't want to steal time from Busisisiwe. Is it another question or another response?
Ramkhali, John, if I may, quickly. Just
if it's a quick one, Ramkhali.
Just on the issue of how we are also trying to increase our efforts in data collection and its quality and so forth, as Kevin rightfully indicated. We also entering and have entered into several memorandum of understandings and agreements with other organizations like Council for Geoscience and SOURCE and others, where we try to maximize resources by saying, let's sort of share collection points, just for an example, rather than having similar things being collected by SOURCE or Council for Geoscience and so forth and so forth. So the issues now is really around how do we again find a way of communally making this information or data and information available. As Musariri indicated, that to some extent somewhere we still have got challenges of where data is commercialized and so forth. But we are striving for that through also collaboration with other organizations in the country. Thanks.
Great, thank you all for those responses and those questions. Clara, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the very interesting discussion. We don't have a lot of time, unfortunately, to talk about potential solutions that can be offered by big data analytics, but I would like to ask Sibusisiwe to start her video and unmute herself and give us her reflections based on the experience that she's had with the collaboration research teams and the interns and their projects, and also looking at what has been highlighted today in terms of the constraints that we have in the region around data collection, around data harmonization and storage and sort of facilities to harness whatever data we can, make it so that it can be used and it can be sort of store in a consistent manner in the absence of sort of agreed or at least used protocols, shared protocols for data collection? And how can big data analytics, in your understanding and in your experience, can help us to move forward? So Busisiwe, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes to share your experience with us. You can take a bit longer, and we know that our audience will stay on. Yeah, that's the resource. Thank you.
Okay, no, that's fine, Clara. Thank you. I'm not going to be too long. And apologies, I cannot share my video because for some reason my system preferences just refuse to give video rights to this GoToWebinar application. So apologies for that. So obviously, in terms of this particular collaboration, we came in as partnering on the skills development side, where we hosted basically the interns that have been working on the 4 projects that have been funded by the collaboration project. And so we experienced, firsthand with them as they battled with some of the challenges of just trying to source data, collate data from the different sources, and in some instances, we literally had to get them talking to each other, and they discovered, actually the other intern does actually have the data that they're looking for. So we then it came, it became apparent to us that, and this is a challenge that is probably being faced by the other professionals in this particular sector, where there's a lot of resources that could actually be saved if there was a way and platforms where data was actually shared. So limiting the number of times people are asking for the same data set from the different sources, but also facilitating the ability where you do have people with maybe modeling skills and skills that are not necessarily more readily available in the water community of practice, that are actually willing to start experimenting using their tools, experimenting the data that is being collected in the community. And so we thought about this idea of, in what ways can technology can be useful to facilitate not only data sharing, but also that cross-pollination of skills, where modelers can be able to interact with the data, but then have ways of not only, you're not just doing a model for the sake of modeling, but also being able to interact with those with the domain expertise, who are then able to interpret the results that you're getting from your models. And we saw this as a recurring theme that was happening as we were mentoring the interns, where even us as mentors, we often had to, even after giving the students advice on some of the tools to try out, through interactions with the actual domain experts, we found that actually there are things that we need to rethink, just because whatever it is or whatever insights that we're getting out maybe do not make sense from a domain expertise perspective. So it was quite a learning experience for us as well, being involved in this particular partnership. But there's some points of reflection from the session that listening through the session today. It's obviously one of the challenges when it comes to the data itself, as one of the speakers pointed out, that you also have a problem where certain projects are funded, and as soon as the funding gets pulled, it may be that then whatever data associated with that project, then there's a halt in terms of the collection of that kind of information. And so that then creates a problem where you start having these data gaps. But one thing that we did realize in being involved in this project is, in as much as there's a challenge with sometimes the quality of the data, there are a lot of organizations that do have a lot of data that is already collected, and we really need to think about innovative ways of extracting as much value from the data that is already there, and using tools to facilitate, easy visualization of this information, and getting insights that are actually relevant to the people that are on the sort of like the consuming end of, what value is it that we are deriving from this data. So we were in fact reflecting yesterday with, I think it was Tariro, if I'm not mistaken, where he mentioned that, sometimes, these technological tools are created, but you find that in practice, they do not work so well. And so it is also one of the things that we realized in participation in this particular project, that obviously in creating whatever tools to help especially extract as much value from data as possible, at the end of the day, whatever outputs needs to be something that is useful to the person at the, on the other side, to the person who's actually needs to use it, either from a management perspective of the resource itself, or even at a policy level. And so there needs to be these forums where there's interactions, not only from at the stage of conceptualization of what needs to be done, or even just, deciphering, what the problem is, to coming up with what might be the solution. But there needs to be interactions both from those who are actually developing the technology to those who would be on the consumption end, to be able to then create technologies that are user-centric and at the end get used. Because obviously we know at the end of the day, these technologies have to be used on a field, they have to be used, by different individuals who behaviorally might be different to the person who's actually developing some of these technologies. So those are some of the lessons that we've also learned, just the importance of being able to interact across the different disciplines that have been involved in this kind of project. Then there was also an issue around just one of the audience members actually raised a point around data that is lacking on the use end. So we also found that there was a challenge, especially when the team that is working on developing the groundwater sustainability framework, where there it's quite important from the modeling perspective to understand, how changes in the environment, from the sense of, changes in some of the climatic factors, changes in land use, have an effect on changes in terms of the groundwater levels themselves. And that is important to understand those relationships from a quantitative perspective, to then be able to do some sort of scenario modeling to say, in the future, if things change, whether it is from a climate or a land use perspective, what can we expect in terms of groundwater availability? And at some later stage, there might be questions around what happens then in terms of groundwater quality. But one of the main challenges was on, just on the availability of data from on the use front. So the team tried to get information, but it wasn't really relevant in terms of saying, this is actually the amount of water being used for, the different categories of uses that they might be. It was actually data on the licensing or the provision of water licenses. And so it was one of the things that we actually were thinking about. Again, if we do have platforms that facilitate people to be able to share information. It could even be a space where you could have maybe even individual researchers or even individual citizens themselves, if they are connected to this peer network, and there's the ability to have a trusted system where people can sort of dictate how they want others to use their data and how they want to get some level of attribution to what they share. Maybe it could be one of the way that we could get also to start looking at this issue of how do we actually collect data on the on use of water in a more sort of consistent way, also in a more timely way, because it's one of the things or one of the pieces that are missing, and it's very crucial when you talk about looking at sustainability of water resources going into the future, especially in the context where we know that there's going to be changes in terms of population growth, certain regions growing and others shrinking as a result of urbanization, for example. How do those things start then to affect how water is being used, and what does it mean in terms of the availability of resources? So those are some of the things that I was thinking about. I'm not sure if any of the interns who've been part of the project and have spent time with us, I'm not sure if they are here, because they could also share, some of the experiences that they've had with us.
I'm checking for you, Sibu, but I don't think they have made it. I saw someone earlier, but I think they probably had to go. Unfortunately, they're not here, but Kevin is, and he can contribute from his experience as a team leader and supervising the research team. If you want to, Kevin, you're welcome to unmute yourself if you want to contribute.
Yes, Clara, thank you. I thought Said is on, so you maybe popped off. No, like I said, I think the application of the tools, we're really excited about that, and we've kind of learned a lot in terms of how to use proxy information and see to what extent we can downscale regional remote sensing data to provide some sort of a perspective on whether a basin, in this regard, we looked at the Dolomite aquifer systems straddling South Africa and Botswana, to what extent those systems is undergoing groundwater depletion. So at that kind of level, it provides some useful insights within the context of decision making, and trying to have some sort of a perspective whether that specific groundwater system is under stress or not. But like I've previously mentioned, is the whole issue then comes in validation. How do you start validating your models against the actual data? And here we're struggling to get time series data across the region, which speaks to many years against which we can validate those models. Otherwise, as our famous president has said, it just becomes fake news. So we need to kind of marry the technology with the systems understanding and how the systems behave. So my role is basically to bring the realism into the debate, into the discussion, and trying to understand it from that perspective. But I think certainly Zaid, who was a PhD student, and we had a number of computer science students working on this, they've enjoyed, or they are enjoying it quite immensely. And I think it's been an skill that I think the country can start benefiting from in the future. So we're excited to take this knowledge further. I don't know if that was what you wanted to hear, Clara.
It's not about what I want to hear, but it's more like it was important for us, and I think also for Sibu to hear that the experience that you had with her was useful beyond the kind of confined realm of the project. I think Zahid is online. Zahid, are you still online? You're showing us Kevin Peterson. I have free Kevin Peterson in the list.
Maybe just a reflection on the point that Kevin has raised that especially for the models, it's quite important to have good sets for validation. I think one of the benefits of being able to use some of the proxy data to then draw inferences on whether you're looking at groundwater level depletions or other outcomes, is that you're also able to identify those areas where we really need to put a lot more effort in terms of monitoring. So on the one hand, it's unfortunate in terms of not being able to validate or to conduct thorough validation studies. But the one thing that it also does help is being able to identify and maybe help in a more targeted effort in terms of monitoring, directing some of the monitoring efforts that the department and the other organizations are tasked with.
Thank you very much, Sibu and Kevin, for these reflections on what has been learned from the project that can also help carving a way forward and make sense for the region, both in terms of SADC and RBOs, as well as to help the Department of Water and Sanitation in South Africa and then in other countries as we can spread the news about the outcome of this research. That was very important, and thank you for summarizing it in a very, very short time. There are no further comments or questions on this specific subject from the field. So I really would like to ask John if we want to take the time to have a final reflection, maybe on the points that were made by Sibu in terms of the opportunities afforded by creating a regional platform that is based on blockchain technology that can start to show the need and the value of sharing data across institutions, across agencies, both within country and at the regional level. What are your thoughts?
I'm watching our numbers declining as we shoot further over time. So I think if I could say one thing, because what I would love to do is just get a final word from each of the panelists before we're just left talking to ourselves. But it's clearly a conversation that has a way to run, and we've really just started scratching the surface. I think if we look at the work of the 4 projects under the collaboration that you described at the beginning, Clara, they really are showing a sense of potential, what these approaches can deliver, but they're also showing, the fundamentals that need to be in place. And I think we heard a lot about that from various speakers around what these things can and can't substitute for in terms of gaps and failings of governance or monitoring networks, data collection systems. But they're showing us what needs to be in place in order for these things to deliver their potential. And I think the other interesting conversation that kind of loops back to the very beginning of this webinar is, are the existing instruments like the SADC protocol and the SADC mechanisms and the RBOs, are they able to adequately incorporate some of these new emerging technologies that weren't even on the radar, when these instruments were designed all those years ago? So it feels like a conversation that has a way to run. And it's something that I certainly look forward to, this conversation evolving and us walking this journey all together as a community of practice and learning from one another. And I think, we'll be thinking about next steps. the Water Research Commission is going to publish the reports from these projects in the coming 6 months, and those will be free to share, and then there'll be a charting of the way forward. Yeah. So I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add before we ask the panelists to share one last brief parting thought. Okay. In that case, could I start?
Go for it with the panelists.
Could I start with Ebenitario? A last thought based on what you've heard, anything you want to leave us with top of mind to take away from you from this webinar?
Thank you. I mean, from the conversation, probably one last word to say that I really agree with what has been raised with regards to the need to really ground validate those sophisticated modeling techniques that we have. I mean, if we don't really calibrate it, it is normally said that nature does not always follow the grounding assumptions that constitute the pillars of models, right? So we build models rooted in certain assumptions from, of course, the science that is behind it, but nature has its own way of behaving. So that's why the ground truthing is very, very important. Secondly, on the issues of the reluctance of member states to share data, yeah, it is true, but probably it is grounded on more personalities sometimes. Because if you look at the grounding principle on certain that cooperation is a driving force. So it's about now to the technocrats to demonstrate what are the benefits of cooperation across member states. So the challenge sometimes rests on us to really demonstrate in practical terms of the value. Thank you.
Thank you for giving us that challenge, Ebenitario. Tariro.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yes, I agree with Eben that when you talk about the sharing of data, what you normally find in the region is the social and economic significance that is attached to the water cost that is being shared normally determines what kind of data is shared and how frequent. If you are in the Zambezi, you know, hydrometrics is not a big issue because there's enough water for everyone. If you're in the Okavango, it's different because then, you know, there's a certain level of scarcity. Someone in Botswana is going to need a certain amount of water to flow right into the delta. So you may be more interested in water quality in the Zambezi, but, you know, priorities then differ if you're in the Okavango or if you're in the Limpopo. So to bring that out as a way of incentivizing cooperation, then we have to go back and look at some of these platforms that we've created through the legal and non-legal documents around water cooperation and governance. One of the missing links, one of the important issues that is not understood higher up there in the hierarchy is that when you actually talk about food security, when you talk about nutrition, when you talk about, you know, issues like drought, climate change, and poverty and so forth, at the end of the day, you're still talking about water. So this understanding needs to come up higher up the radar, and in this region, as we move towards much more in terms of challenges around water scarcity, this becomes important. But the role of data in water cooperation, I think, is one very good area that we need to be investing or focusing so that we make, you know, the data exchange efficient and seamless, at the same time make it very relevant. So when you talk about big data, I think we are being presented with opportunities, whether we're talking about surface water or groundwater, we are being presented with opportunities to think of how we want to do our water governance better and cheaper in the long run. You know, efficient and seamless data exchange is going to become very important in the next 10 to 20 years. And this is where we all want to be involved to see that we have a better future in the region. We are much more water secure. And for the river basin organizations, I think their roadmaps should really begin to think about how to use data. And hopefully from WRC and from IBM, there will be some kind of support to keep doing this research on how to implement this big data, as a new kid on the block, to really blend it with the water governance and make us a little more efficient. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you for pulling it together so neatly, Tariro. Can I go to Ramokhale?
Thanks, John. Thanks, colleagues. I will just highlight one thing over and above what has already been mentioned here, which is the real efforts of taking advantage of the platforms or the organizations that we have already, the river basin organizations, of the commitments at the regional level, at country levels, to really strengthen the relationships amongst organizations where the efficient use of little resources available in ensuring the data collection, harmonization, and quality of all that is actually a national issue, where now we share, joint resources, because things are limited. You have seen how shrinking we have always been with regard to going out and collecting and so forth and so forth. And built to that two elements of capacity building in the form of warm bodies, and also in terms of exploring the new revolution of use of the robots and other things that we could explore to assist the data collection. So I'll leave it at that, John.
Thanks, Ramokhale. Some very strong common themes emerging here. Mkhulisi?
Thank you very much, colleagues. Thanks to everyone. It has been a great experience, even throughout the project, from when we were involved, myself and Mr. Peterson Ramsia. I'm looking forward to seeing the final product at an operational level. I think I still need to live long enough to see all our research output turning into something that we can operationalize. So hopefully I will still be alive, but I have hope that that will happen. So for me, I would like to see the final product. I would like to see us operationalizing it at the sector level. That's what I'm looking forward to. And it's great work to the IBM, great work to Clara, great work to all the other partners who were involved in this project. I know that in the beginning we were a bit of a nuisance, we were on the side of the complainers, but now we have bought into the project. We understand what is happening. So we're looking forward to us driving the car now, even if it has 3 wheels, but we want to drive it anyways. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Mkhulisi. You're aware that we're recording this webinar, so we're going to hold you to those things. So, last word before I hand to Clara to close.
Thanks, John. I think from our perspective, the most important, or the way that we view our role as a technology partner, is that we want to facilitate, integration, whether it is at a level where we're looking at how do we maximize, in terms of what is available, collected by the different parties in terms of data, but also integration in terms of between different organizations, some that might have different needs, from in terms of being able to share what the resources that they have, and being able to provide customization to facilitate or give them better control in terms of what they share. So looking at solutions to how do we enable or facilitate sharing, especially of water data in this particular instance. But obviously, we realize that there also needs to be integration with the rest of the community, in the sense that technology can never replace the need to have protocols for data collection, so achieving some level of consistency in terms of what is actually collected on the ground, because that only, in as much as you can use tools and techniques to correct some of those deficiencies, it still goes a long way if a lot of effort is put in terms of standardizing the way we collect data, especially in the transboundary context. And obviously, if technology can, in reverse, be used to identify, gaps and facilitate, the conversation on how can we deploy resources to improve some of our monitoring efforts, then that is great. So I think that's the perspective in which we come into this kind of engagement, as looking at sort of like the integration aspects of it.
Thank you, Sibusiwe. I think that's a great note, optimistic but pragmatic on which to close this webinar. So thank you for striking that note. I'm going to say my thank yous to all the speakers and to Clara for all her work in organizing, and to those of you who have stayed with us so far over time. Thank you all, and Clara, over to you to close.
Thank you everybody, and yes, thank you to all the people who have stayed beyond their call of duty. It's always nice when you have so many panelists to know that you have an audience that is a bit bigger. So thank you for staying on. Thank you to all the institutions that were part of this discussion. So the Limpopo River Basin Commission, Department of Water and Sanitation of South Africa, IUCN Water Program for East and Southern Africa, and IBM Research Africa. Thank you to SWP and IUCN for having created this platform, first with the training and now for the discussion and roundtable. And I would like to just remind you that we have a rapporteur for this session, which we thought was very important. And so you will receive a report, and you will also receive a notification of when the recordings for all of the webinars will be put onto our YouTube channel. So watch out for the communication. It will come through a MailChimp advert from the Sustainable Water Partnership under the banner of the Big Data Analytics and Transboundary Water Collaboration for Southern Africa. If there's any further communication you wish to have on the content of the webinar series, please get in touch with me or with John, especially if it is about the content and the management of this workshop. And we hope that in a normal time, we would say we would have a big meeting to sort of talk about issues that have come up today and really write possibly on pen and paper the way forward. But we know that this may well not happen. So maybe it's important to note that any further engagement will be online. And if you're interested in being part of this discussion further, please definitely get in touch with John and I, and we'll keep you informed. Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are. And we're looking forward to seeing you again soon. You're all welcome to unmute yourself and say goodbye and wave. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheers, everyone. See you
Bye.
again.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.